This video is part 2 of proofing my negatives. I've got my enlarger set up and ready to go, and the change that I made between the first video and now is I've opened my aperture on my enlarger lens by 1 step. And that's because the darkest strip on my negatives on my first test strip was not dark enough, and I'll explain what I'm looking for in just a minute. I've got everything set up and ready to go in between these videos, and now my light's going to come on a little brighter, but I'm still going to do 5 seconds at a time. And after 5 seconds, just like I did before, I'm going to move my cardboard down a little bit. The reason that I reset everything and I'm going with a brighter aperture setting on my enlarger lens is because the proper way to proof your negatives is to look at this test strip once it's been processed under normal lights, and I lost track. How many did I do? Haha, I've forgotten. That's okay. I'm gonna do another one. A proper test strip, a proper proof sheet is one that prints your negatives where the edges of your film, where the sprocket holes are, just barely disappear into the black area of the paper. In photo terms, it's called ghosting the sprockets. And so I've saved my first test strip, and I'm going to try to compare the two once I get this one into the fixer. You can see off the side of the screen here while that one develops. I'm going to drip this one into the fixer to get that going. And watching the timer here, I'm only 15-20 seconds into the whole thing right now. And what we see on this is that these edges are starting to get even darker compared to my very first test strip. And the reason that we do this is because when making a proof sheet is using the blank edges of the film as a guide to calibrate your exposure, helps you at a glance more quickly see whether images are worth printing or not. And that's actually a minute, so I'm going to let this drip. We're remembering to not cross-contaminate these trays too much, so I'm going to go to the next tray without touching the tongs. Let that sit for 10 seconds. And then what I'll do is I will pull this out and get it into the fixer, and we'll see if under the safe lights we can actually see the difference between these two strips of paper. But you should be able to get the sense that right off the bat I'm using only a portion of paper because I have to guess. I'm making a guess as to what my exposure needs to be. So on the left is my first print, or my first test, and it's actually not very bright. So I'm going to flip on the white lights. That's better. And you can see, pardon the reflection from the light above me, here's my first test strip printed at an aperture of f8, and you can see my darkest area right here. Every dividing line is going to be 5 seconds. How close can I get? Oh, I can zoom in. Watch this. Yeah. It's following me. You can see that my lightest segment, that's a 5-second exposure, and every time we see that line and it gets darker, that's 5 additional seconds, because as the time exposure increases, the print is going to get darker. And we're looking at these edges of the film, the sprocket holes. So this is attempt number 1, 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds. And here's attempt number 2, where I've opened up the lens a little more, and you can see that the edges of my frames get darker faster. Here's 5, 10, 15, and 20. And at 15 seconds, you can see that those edges are barely visible. So I'm going to go back to my enlarger. Let me turn off the white lights. I go back to my enlarger. I reset my timer to the time that matches my test strip. Let me zoom back out. There we go. I slowly and inefficiently, because I only have one hand, open up my paper. Now I'm going to get out a full sheet of paper. Make sure this is positioned emulsion side up. I put the whole set of negatives on the paper. It's almost the perfect size. I close the whole thing, and you can see how this piece of equipment gets its name. It's called a contact printer, because it's holding my negatives in contact with the paper, because it's all underneath the glass. And remember, one tip is that you don't have to remove your negatives from the plastic in order to make a print like this. So with everything set up, I haven't changed anything on my enlarger lens. I haven't changed the height of my enlarger. I haven't moved any of this, and I haven't switched enlargers. So 15 seconds on here should match the 15-second strip on this new test strip. When you're going from evaluating a print or a test strip in a tray, and you go back to the enlarger, you always only ever change one piece of the equation, because if you end up changing multiple parts, you run the risk of being unsure why things went right or why things went wrong. I now process this entire proof sheet the same way as I process any print in the darkroom, photogram, regular enlargement, proof sheet, etc. And I'll double check to make sure that the edges of my film disappear just like they do on my fixed piece right there in the fixer tray. I will put this through all the steps and into the wash and wash it for 10 minutes, and then I will dry the sucker off, and I will have my first successful proof sheet. Because another tip actually, because I am haven't changed anything else, if these settings work for one print proof sheet, then they'll work for my other rolls of film if I happen to have more than one in the darkroom at the same time. So good luck with making a proof. It's the first step to darkroom printing from film, and first step on your way to becoming real photographers.